I'm going to come back to that point, Rila. I have the honor to table the following documents before this House. The 2025 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2025 Appropriation Bill, the 2025 ESCOM Debt Relief Amendment Bill, the 2025 Public Sector Pension and Related Payments Bill, the 2025 Revenue Laws Amendment Bill, the 2025 Estimate of National Expenditure, the 2025 Budget Review, and this 2025 Budget Speech. Just on a lighter note, Madam Speaker, let me first, before going on that lighter note, take the point raised by Honorable Manyi. And indeed, it was an inconvenience for this Parliament and the people of South Africa. And indeed, we owe this Parliament an apology. And we owe the people of South Africa an apology. No doubt about that. We didn't like the postponement. But on a lighter note, I saw on social media something that said this budget is postponed until my favorite club wins. That is Kaizer Chiefs. In cabinet, when I made this point, Dr. Ramkhopa wrote me a piece of note and said, "Yo, this budget will never be tabled." And Honorable Gigawa said, "Hey, these people are putting the country in crisis because this budget will never be tabled." Now, let me go back to the postponement, as I've apologized. Go back to the postponement and say the postponement of the tabling of the budget 3 weeks ago was a regrettable, but perhaps an understandable feature of multi-party governance. It is also a sign of some of the difficulties associated with a multi-party democracy. But what is positive is that the delay has stimulated an unprecedented level of public debate about the difficult policy trade-offs we as a nation face. A vital debate about which policies to fund and how to fund them, about which priorities to pursue now and which ones we may need to delay in the context of unlimited resources. As much as the debate has been dominated by the proposed increase to value-added tax, the bigger debate must be about how we grow the economy for the benefit of all South Africans. A bigger, faster-growing economy and the larger fiscal resources that comes with it would give us more fiscal room to meet more of our developmental goals. But the truth is that our economy has stagnated for over a decade. In that time, GDP growth has averaged less than 2%, far below the level required to meet our expanding list of needs. In 2024, the economy grew by only 0.6%. Over the medium term, GDP growth is projected to average 1.8%. To meet our goals of redistribution, redress, and structural transformation, the economy needs to grow much faster and in an inclusive manner. This is the central objective of the current administration. Today's budget proposes a bold and pragmatic approach to achieve this formidable task. It calls for macroeconomic stability supported by sound fiscal policy, for the deepening of structural reforms to remove the obstacles to growth and job creation, and for scaling up infrastructure to unlock the productive capacity of the economy while building a capable state that supports all these efforts. The budget remains committed to a balanced fiscal strategy. As projected in the 2024 medium-term budget policy statement, a budget primary surplus of 0.5% of GDP will be achieved in the 2025, and this will grow to 0.9% in 25-26. Government debt will stabilize at 76.2% of GDP in 25-26, while the consolidated budget deficit also narrows to 3.5% by 27-28. Madam Speaker, as debt stabilizes, a growing surplus will enable the government to reduce debt service cost as a proportion of revenue. Some of these savings will be used to build up fiscal buffers that we need as protection against future economic shocks. Shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and other uncertainties stemming from the rising geopolitical tensions and the global economic ramifications thereof. Debt service costs will amount to 389.6 billion in the current financial year. This translates to 22 cents of every rand we raise in revenue. It is more than what we spend on health, the police, or basic education. We must reverse this trend and prevent the cost of debt from taking away resources that could otherwise be spent on our pressing social needs or to invest in growth. In this regard, our fiscal strategy stabilizes debt service cost as a percentage of revenue in 24-25 by maintaining a primary budget surplus. The ESCOM debt relief arrangements are also effective and contribute to improved fiscal position. ESCOM is now in a much better fiscal position than in 2023 when the debt relief was originally announced. As a result of these improvements, we have decided to simplify the final phase of the debt relief package. The last 70 billion debt takeover will now be replaced with a 40 billion in 2025-26, 10 billion in 28-29. This will result in a saving for the government of about 20 billion rand. Honorable members, these fiscal improvements are important milestones on our path to fostering a stable macroeconomic environment that is a prerequisite for a higher level of growth and that promotes job creation, improve public services, and reduce inequalities. Our strategy to achieve faster growth remains anchored in the following 4 pillars: maintaining macroeconomic stability, implementing structural reforms, improving state capacity, and accelerating infrastructure investment. Maintaining macroeconomic stability, inclusive of prudent fiscal policy, promotes stable prices, lowers interest rates, and enhances the country's resilience to external shocks. This creates a conducive environment for investment. Implementing structural reforms removes impediments to growth and creates a solid foundation for a higher and sustained economic growth. Madam Speaker, it was out of this realization that economic growth and fiscal stability are mutually reinforcing that Operation Vulindlela was formed as a joint venture between Treasury and the Presidency to fast-track the implementation of the structural reforms. Its objective were to stabilize the supply of electricity, create a competitive and efficient freight logistics system, reduce the cost and improve the quality of digital communication, ensure a stable quality supply of water, reform the visa regime to facilitate skilled immigration and support tourism. Since its establishment in 2020, Operation Vulindlela has made real progress in achieving these objectives. For example, the energy reforms have created 22,500 megawatts pipelines of projects. More than 10,000 megawatts are formally registered with NASA, which is of the last step in the regulatory process. These projects will contribute to reducing power cuts. The freight logistic roadmap was approved. The roadmap allows private sector participation and gives third-party access to any operator without discrimination in accordance with the network statement. The cost of 1.5 gigabyte data bundle has declined by 51%, allowing individuals and small businesses to access more affordable data. The water use license backlog has been cleared, unlocking billions in investment and freeing projects that had stalled because of the backlog. The water quality regulatory system was reinstated for the first time since 2014. This is the green drop, blue drop, and no drop certification that enables effective intervention in supporting failing municipalities to provide clean water to citizens. E-visas for travelers from 34 countries have been introduced to significantly boost tourism. The Trusted Employer Scheme has been established to fast-track visa process for major investors. These achievements have eased economic bottlenecks and built on the successes. So phase 2 of OV will focus on the following: through existing reforms in energy, water, logistic, and visa system. Strengthen local government in improving the delivery of basic services. Harnessing digital public infrastructure as a driver of growth and inclusion. And creating sufficient productive and inclusive cities. Madam Speaker, infrastructure is a key pillar of our growth strategy. It is the bedrock for economic development, a key source of jobs, and an avenue for scaling up service delivery. This budget reflects that understanding. Allocation towards capital payments are the fastest growing area of spending by economic classification. Public infrastructure spending over the next 3 years will amount to more than 1 trillion rand. The spending will focus on 3 sectors: 402 billion rand for transport and logistics, 219 billion for energy infrastructure, 156 billion rand for water and sanitation. In transport, the South African National Roads Agency will spend 100 billion rand over the medium term to keep the national road network in good condition. Provincial roads departments will reseal over 16,000 lane kilometers of roads in their areas of authority. Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa is making steady progress to rebuild the infrastructure to provide affordable commuter rail services. To sustain this progress, we have provisionally allocated an additional 19.2 billion over the medium term for critical signaling. This will enable commuters from areas such as Mamelodi, Wamashu, Motherwell, Khayelitsha, Naledi, to name but a few, to catch a train every 10 minutes. To get to and from work and significantly reduce the money that lower-income households spend on transport. Let me pause and show an example. Let me pause. The World Bank has produced a report. People tend to be selective when they write report. They don't read what they don't like. What that report says is that rand for rand, if we had to compare a worker from South Korea and a worker from South Africa, rand for rand, the South African worker gets lesser disposable income than the South Korea. The explanation is cost of transport. In South Africa, that cost of transport is affected by 2 things. the spatial dimension, and secondly, the cost of transport. And this investment critically deals with that challenge for poor communities in our areas. I don't know, when somebody said this budget is not proper, what do you mean? This allocation will also allow PRASA to maximum the potential of the 241 new trains delivered through the rolling stock renewal program. Despite the progress made, PRASA procurement system needs strengthening. The management of the unit of the entity has already instituted measures to strengthen their procurement weaknesses. This includes getting support from the National Treasury to build capacity and mitigate risks, and undertaking live audits for larger procurement projects. In the water sector, we're investing in several large-scale dam projects that are ramping up or entering construction. The Mkomazi project is expected to commence construction in November 2027, transferring water into the Mngeni water supply system. This will increase the total capacity of the system to 5 million households in eThekwini and 4 district municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal. The Bergville augmentation scheme is expected to start in July 2026. The project will improve the Western Cape's water supply system, improving regional water security while reliably supplying domestic, agricultural, and industrial water users. To further accelerate infrastructure delivery and effectiveness, we are continuing reforms to facilitate greater private sector participation, capital budget reform, and alternative infrastructure financing. The new regulations for public-private partnerships have been finalized and will take effect on the 1st of June 2025. The regulation reduces procedural complexity of undertaking PPPs, create capacity to support and manage PPPs, create clear rules for managing unsolicited bids, and strengthen fiscal risk governance. The regulation also makes provision for national department to establish sector-specific PPP units. These units will drive private sector participation, creating opportunities to optimize the balance sheets of financial distressed state-owned companies. The Department of Transport and Transnet will engage the market on PSP projects in the following areas: the iron ore, chrome, coal, and manganese lines, expansion and automation of the ferrochrome and magnetite terminal at the port of Richards Bay, the container and automotive sectors, including the potential designation of the South African container port system as a regional transshipment hub for major shipping lines, and establishment of independent rolling stock leasing company. Should Transnet require gap funding for its PSP project, the budget facility for infrastructure will consider these after proper packaging and financial structuring. Additional guarantees may also be considered to finance the entity's maturing debt as well as its capital investment program. In the energy sector, the independent transmission program will be launched later this year. A request for information for a multi-line transmission packaging will also be issued by the Independent Power Producer Office in July this year, followed by a request for proposal in November. This will enable the private sector to play a key role in the expansion of the transmission network. Madam Speaker, we have reconfigured the BFI, the budget for infrastructure facility, to run multiple bid windows instead of just one annual window. Earlier this week, we published a call for proposal under the new system. The first window is now open and will close mid-April. The next window will open soon thereafter. Financing decisions to determine the appropriate fiscal mechanism to support projects have also been separated from the evaluation and budget processes. This will facilitate the mobilization of significant private finance and improve allocative efficiency in fiscal support. This includes financing for proposals approved during the special window last year. Lastly, our efforts to diversify the financing structure to support infrastructure are taking shape. A credit guarantee vehicle to mobilize private sector capital by de-risking projects will be launched in 2026. Its initial focus will be on independent transmission, aimed at bridging the energy transmission deficit. Once the vehicle has demonstrated its efficacy, it will be broadened to include other sectors. Government will issue its first infrastructure bond in 25-26. We will also introduce other innovative financing instruments to diversify the infrastructure fund sources. Financial institutions, including pension funds, banks, development banks, and international financial institutions, have already expressed interest in participating. This, Madam Speaker, is how we plan to leverage infrastructure investment to ease supply-side constraints to the economy and improve access to social services the people get. Madam Speaker, there are several persistent spending pressures in health, education, transport, and security. These have to do with the government properly fulfilling its service delivery mandate. After careful consideration, the government has decided to fund these. Deferring the funding of these sectors further would compromise the government's ability to meet its constitutional obligation to those people. To raise the revenue needed, the government proposes to increase the VAT rate by 0.5 percentage point in 25-26 and by another 0.5 percentage point in the following year. This will bring the VAT rate to 16% by 26-27. Let me pause for a moment. Let me pause for a moment and say,
Order, honorable members. Let's allow the minister to finish his presentation.
Madam Speaker, should the spending reviews and other measures we're embarking on yield enough extra revenue, we will reassess the need to embark on the second 0.5 percentage point increase to VAT. Government also proposes no inflationary adjustment to personal income tax brackets and medical tax credits. These measures will raise 28 billion in additional revenue in 25-26 and 14.5 billion in 26-27. Madam Speaker, this decision was not taken lightly. I can tell you now, no Minister of Finance is ever happy to increase taxes. We are aware of the fact that a lower overall burden of tax can help to increase investment and job creation and also unlock household spending power. We, however, have had to balance this knowledge against the very real and pressing service delivery needs that are vital to our developmental goals, and we cannot be further postponed. Honourable members, we thoroughly examined alternative raising the VAT rate. We weighed the policy trade-offs involved in increasing the corporate and personal income taxes. Increasing the corporate and personal income taxes would generate less revenue while potentially harming investment, job creation, and economic growth. Corporate tax collections have declined over the last few years, an indication of falling profits and a trading environment worsened by the logistic constraint and rising electricity cost. Furthermore, South Africa's corporate income tax collections are already higher than most of our peer countries. On the other hand, an increase to the personal income tax rate would reduce taxpayers' incentive to work and save. Our top personal income tax rate and our personal income tax collection as a percentage of GDP are far higher than those of the most developing countries. Increasing it is therefore not feasible. Taking on additional debt to meet the spending pressures was also not feasible. The amount is simply too large. The cost of borrowing would be unaffordable. Our sub-investment credit rating would also make this level of borrowing costlier and put us at a risk of even further downgrowth. Madam Speaker, VAT is a tax that affects everyone. By opting for a marginal increase to VAT, its distributional effect and impact were costly considered. The increase is also the most effective way to avoid further spending cuts and to enable us to extend the social wage. The government is very aware of the cost of living pressures faced by households, including higher food and fuel prices and rising electricity and transport costs. This is why we are taking concrete steps to protect vulnerable households. This is done through providing social grant increases that are above the inflation, expanding the basket of zero-rated items to include vegetables, dairy liquid, blends, meats and poultry products. We are also not increasing the fuel levy for another year, saving consumers around 4 billion. Madam Speaker, broadening the tax base and improving the administrative efficiency of the South African Revenue Service allow us over time to spread the tax burden more evenly and equitably. With this in mind, SARS is allocated 3.5 billion in the current financial year and an additional 4.4 billion over the medium term. That takes the total SARS allocation to 7.5 billion over the medium term. By the end of February this year, SARS reported a significant increase in undisputed debt. This means billions of rand are owed to the state. The revenue collector has also detected 156,000 taxpayers who are not registered and who have not filed despite their substantial economic activity. We therefore call on all South Africans to comply with the law and support SARS in its endeavor to collect the revenue that enables government to fund and provide critical services. I also want to emphasize the importance of tax compliance. I thank all compliant taxpayers who pay their fair share of taxes. I also encourage those that are not compliant to do the right thing. The rewards of higher tax compliance and efficiency take time. Once again, the investment we make today in SARS will allow us to collect at the time to make improvements. Madam Speaker, the revenue proposed through the tax measures announced in this budget will contribute largely to us providing 232.6 billion in additional funding to key programs over the medium term. This amounts to 102 billion in 25-26, 68 billion in 26-27, 62 billion in